Chapter 22. The Race for Berlin, January to March 1945. January 1945 was the beginning of the 6th year of the bloodiest and most destructive conflict in human history. In Europe, the heady mood of optimism of winning the war by Christmas, which the British and Americans had believed a distinct possibility in September 1944, had melted away in the face of fierce German resistance. The progress of the armies commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, had been badly affected by supply difficulties and the onset of a bitter winter, and although the Allies had convinced themselves that a conclusive victory was now within their grasp, the race for Berlin would still take some winning. As the Russian, British and American troops edged ever closer to the German capital, the opening months of 1945 would see some of the most brutal battles of the Second World War as the fight against the Axis powers intensified. This was equally true out in the Pacific too, as the struggle to overcome the Imperial Japanese Army continued. The Allied forces prepared for an attack on mainland Japan, and on a global scale there was a growing sense of hope that the war would soon be over. But while the Nazi and Japanese troops refused to back down, battling fiercely even when staring defeat in the face, there were still months of fighting ahead, with many more lives destined to be lost before victory could be celebrated. Also, with thoughts turning towards rebuilding Europe in the post-war era, the cracks really began to show between the three major Allied powers, as the democratic principles of America and Great Britain were at direct odds with Russia and the brutal communist regime of Joseph Stalin. The race for Berlin was now not only about defeating Adolf Hitler, but also key to the division of territory in the aftermath of the conflict. But for now, there was still a lot of ground to be covered before the war could be won. As the new year of 1945 dawned, in Europe, all eyes were focused on the Battle of the Bulge that was still raging. 2 weeks before, on December 16th, a quiet, thinly held sector of the American front line on the Belgian-German frontier had suddenly been torn apart by a massive Nazi offensive. The hills and woods of the Ardennes, the scene of Germany's great Blitzkrieg offensive of May 1940, once more reverberated to the crash of artillery and the squeal of panzer tracks as Adolf Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West began. As the Germans pushed into Belgium, Hitler's immediate objective was the River Meuse, but the real strategic prize was the port of Antwerp, which lay another 80 miles away. The loss of this vital supply centre would have spelt catastrophe for Eisenhower's armies, but there was also a more sinister edge to the campaign, as Hitler aimed to encircle the US troops and destroy them. With only 3 American infantry divisions standing in the way of 500,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, the surprise attack was a staggering success. Despite US troops fiercely resisting the Nazi onslaught, after 7 days of fighting, Operation Watch on the Rhine quite literally punched a bulge in the American front line, which was 50 miles wide and 40 miles deep. Therefore, the Battle of the Bulge was so named. But as the days passed and Allied reinforcements poured in to defend the area, Hitler soon discovered that despite taking an early advantage, he had underestimated the strength of the enemy. Before long, the commanders of the 5th and 6th SS Panzer armies realized that their troops were simply not strong enough to reach Antwerp or even the Meuse. With fuel running low and Allied bombers pounding their supply routes, the advance of the 6th SS Panzer Army was stalled, and by Christmas Day the offensive in the Ardennes had run out of steam. Meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, Hitler's Axis partners, the Japanese, were continuing to struggle against the Allied advance. By the end of 1944, Japan's empire was rapidly shrinking as the pressure mounted. In northern Burma, a British Imperial Army, led by General Bill Slim, supported by American air power, had instigated an offensive to recover the entire country. And further east, powerful American amphibious forces based on the Mariana Islands and New Guinea had invaded late in the 1,000-mile-long Philippines island chain. The US Navy also had a few scores of their own to settle, and in the Battle of Leyte Gulf that followed, they managed to wipe out most of the Japanese Navy, including all its remaining aircraft carriers. To the satisfaction of US commanders, the victory saw the attack on Pearl Harbor finally avenged. By November 19...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?